បងស្នេហ៍អូនមួយស្អិតដិតជាប់គ្មានប្រែបើគ្មានអូនទេដូចតាមពូកមានផ្លែផ្កាបងស្នេហ៍តែអូនកុំស្អប់ពើមបងឡើយអត់ស្រងឆោមឆាយភ្នែកបងរូបហើយមកបងស្នេហ៍តែអូនរាល់ថ្ងៃគ្មានភ្លេងម្ដងគិតដល់ស្រងនួនល្អងតាំងតែពីតូចដល់ធំបែបនថ្ងៃព្រឹកឲ្យតែជួបមុខមុំអូនអើយអូនកុំឲ្យបងខកប្រានព្រោះស្រីល្អ
Arun Susadai, and to everyone in the audience, good evening to people on the US mainland, good afternoon to people in Hawaii, and good morning to everyone in Southeast Asia. My name is Miriam Stark, and I have the great honor of being the director for the University of Hawaii at Mānoa's Center for Southeast Asian Studies and the director of our Loose Southeast Asia Transitions Grant. So I'm welcoming you today and happy to pass the baton to our fabulous new colleague in Asian Studies, Dr. Gillian Bogart. Please enjoy the session today.
Aloha mai kākou, and thank you to Miriam and for everybody at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies here who's organized this event. Today's webinar highlights the human rights and conflict dispute mechanisms in place for the Association for Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, to address member states' domestic human rights issues and conflicts between member nations. The panelists will discuss the bloc's long-standing non-interference principle, the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, and the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration to see how these principles are applying to member states and their citizens. I'll say that I can't think of much of a better time to be having this conversation. We're on the heels of the 2025 ASEAN Summit held just over a week ago in Kuala Lumpur, where we saw Timor-Leste finally become the 11th member nation. We saw some handshakes affirming that a ceasefire between Thailand and Cambodia will be continued or extended. We also saw some world leaders dancing. But there is also a lot that we didn't see. Of course, discussions held via side channels, deals made through backdoor diplomacy in typical ASEAN ways. We also didn't see some of the truly critical human rights issues that are persisting in the region addressed. And so fortunately, we have a fantastic panel of experts who are here to talk with us about some of these issues. And it's my honor to introduce them. First, we have Dr. Aarie Glas, who is coming to us from the Department of Political Science at Northern Illinois University. He is a specialist in international relations and Southeast Asian Studies affiliate faculty there. His work is focused on regional governance and conflict management. Professor Glas is also an executive committee member of the American Political Science Association's Interpretive Methodologies and Methods Group. Next, we have Mr. Daniel Awigra, who is also an expert in international relations. He comes to us as executive director of Indonesia's NGO Coalition for International Human Rights Advocacy. He is co-founder of the group Better Engagement Between East and Southeast Asia, and also a co-founding member of Indonesia's Journalists Association for Diversity. And our third panelist, last but not least, is Dr. Sirada Khemanitthathai, who is a lecturer at the School of International Affairs in the Faculty of Political Science and Public Administration at Chiang University. She is also the research chair on forced displacement in Southeast Asia at the Regional Center for Social Science and Sustainable Development. She's got ongoing research projects related to border security at the Myanmar-Thailand border. And this is especially following the coup in 2021. I think we're going to have a really robust conversation, and so grateful for all of you being here and grateful to everybody here in attendance for being part of the conversation today. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Aarie Glas.
Thank you so much. I'm going to quickly, I hope, share my slide. You should be able to see that okay, Gillian? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you, Dr. Bogart and Dr. Stark and Skillman, and to Pin and the team at the Center for Southeast Asia Studies. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm poor with time management, so I'm going to try to jump right in. I'm speaking on the kind of broad and I think sort of background to the conversation we're going to have, theme of ASEAN membership and conflict management. There's a few things I want to do somewhat quickly, I think, to sort of lay the foundations, and then maybe we can explore as a group and wider discussion some more of the nuance later on. But I want to sort of explore, again, a little bit of background in terms of the membership of the organization, which I think we all know about, but to state the obvious, and then some of the sort of complications that come from a survey of that membership in terms of the sheer diversity of ASEAN's membership. Comment very briefly on the institutions, or at least the type of institutions that drive ASEAN's governance and regional behavior, et cetera. And then sort of zero in on some of questions around the principles and practices of ASEAN regionalism and conflict management. And then rather quickly, for the sake of time, sort of put a little bit of a spotlight on some of the trends or dynamics in the last almost 5 years of ASEAN's engagement since the coup and conflict in Myanmar. So I want to start off, as I said, sort of rather basically and mostly as a sort of background here. Oops. For this a little bit, just in terms of the membership. So the very basics here, we've got 11 member states, as I think everyone in the audience knows: Brunei, Myanmar, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and as of just last week, Timor-Leste, who was not on the map I acquired from the Council on Foreign Relations yet to indicate, so I've circled it here. And the organization is headquartered in Jakarta, in Indonesia, which I think is an important fact to sort of state when we start thinking about the diversity of membership and the influence that individual members or political elites therein have over the practices of the organization. So needless to say, I think it's an incredibly diverse organization. I do some comparative organizational studies. Whoops, just accidentally stopped my screen sharing, apologies. Here we go. And ASEAN is a particularly diverse regional organization, as a couple of these screenshots are meant to sort of indicate, and a diversity that is recognized, cultivated, celebrated, and struggled with by the organization. So in front of you, you've got a couple of screen grabs from ASEAN sociocultural community webpage, sort of thinking about a way to sort of signal the diversity, a recognition of the tremendous variation among member states, cultural, historical, social, linguistic, you name it, diversity, and the challenges of fostering unity between them. So I think this is a sort of salient reality to confront when we start thinking about the challenges of regionalism and conflict management within this institution, the types of diversity that we see. And the types of diversity are multiple. There's a diverse amount of diversity here. In terms of sort of socioeconomic levels of development, et cetera, there's a tremendous amount of diversity as well. Of course, I think that's an intuitive point for all here, but it's a really salient issue. And I think when we're thinking of the limits and the potentials for ASEAN's response to human rights challenges, to crises within the region more generally. On the economic side of things, I know has been explored recently. It's a challenge, obviously, for a regional organization to unite states as diverse, for example, as Singapore and Myanmar here, or Indonesia and Laos, when we look at the size and the scope of their economies, et cetera. And this diversity is all the more sort of salient in terms of responding to regional crises within the region and beyond, when we also think about sort of broader aspects of diversity as well. So needless to say, intuitively, we know, of course, there's a tremendous amount of diversity among political regimes, and also a tremendous amount of diversity in terms of geopolitical interest and alignment. That's sort of worth underscoring as well. So most crucially, I think, and something to sort of foreground in some of the cases we might be interested, is thinking about varied relationships between ASEAN's member states and the US and China. I think that this has been a sort of a salient inflection point in a number of challenges that we might wish to explore, the sort of push and pull of great power politics and interest in navigating a third way between them, in demonstrating agency, et cetera. This can be impactful for ASEAN's governance behavior in multiple ways. And I think this is immediately clear when we compare, for example, Cambodia and the Philippines. Here, the sort of screen grabs of recent headlines is meant to indicate this in terms of their military relationships between both the Chinese support for the expanded Ream naval base, for example, versus the deepening military alliance between the US and the Philippines. I think calls this to mind, as does recent polling on kind of the shifting tides and the variation across member states in terms of public opinion around would-be alliances or would-be aligning with the great powers. So in very briefest terms, we've got a huge and varied membership, I think, and that's sort of a foundational component to consider here when we're investigating how ASEAN responds to challenges or manages or attempts to manage conflict as well. So I think that this presents some important challenges for ASEAN, and it helps us explain the next thing I want to talk to, which is the relatively slim and informal kind of institutional structures that the organization relies upon. And I say that at least in terms of a kind of comparative context alongside the AU or the EU, for example, that ASEAN has a relatively sort of slim institutional profile and a rather top-down one that I want to sort of survey really quickly here. So ASEAN is, I think, as we know from following the news last week, a rather top-down institutions. Leaders, government ministers sort of matter most. They're the driver's seats through regional summits like that was held just last week in Kuala Lumpur and pictured here. Interestingly, I think we can note as well that while the sort of the summits that are held twice a year are kind of the pivotal sort of inflection points in the scope of the organization, there's a lot more than just the summits of leaders and ministers involved too. This little graphic I'm putting up here came from the Malaysian Foreign Ministry, and I think it's sort of an interesting one for at least two sort of reasons. So alongside the summits that are held twice annually are a series of ever-expanding related summits or related meetings with various extra regional actors and states. And this infographic, I think, is sort of useful in two reasons. So one is that it lists the ASEAN leaders, and conspicuously absent, you might be thinking there are 9 there. Conspicuously absent is a leader from Myanmar, and that's sort of telling of a dynamic I want to return to in a little bit. So it only notes 9 of the 10 ASEAN members in terms of leadership. Myanmar was represented by a political representative from the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but not the military government per se. So that's sort of a telling indication of how ASEAN's attempting to manage things, which I'll come back to in a moment. But you can also see sort of who's highlighted beyond ASEAN members at the summit. So we've got Timor-Leste, of course, sort of first on the bill there, becoming a membership at the summit, or sorry, becoming a member at the summit. And then it's sort of key dialogue partners and partners beyond the region, the US, China, South Korea, Japan, etc., as well as some sort of at the bottom there, interesting institutional figures like the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, and FIFA. So sort of interesting reflection there as well. But beyond summitry, I also want to note that while I think it's really important to pay attention to what's happening at the level of the summit, ASEAN is a lot more. I think we'll explore some of its growing institutional footprint and institutional architecture in the discussion that comes ahead. But I would just underscore that ASEAN sort of famously hosts 1,000 meetings a year. So any given day, there's likely to be 3 or so official ASEAN meetings, events happening somewhere within the region or beyond across its 3-pillared approach to governance, political security, sociocultural, and economic pillars or communities of interaction. And I think it's worth just sort of, again, noting the ASEAN Secretariat pictured here, which is also host to the Committee of Permanent Representatives, or the CPR, ambassador level officials from all of the now 11 member states meeting in permanent session in South Jakarta here. So I sort of articulate broadly these kind of institutional elements just so we can sort of return to them later on. But I think what's sort of even more important for us to consider is what does this sort of governance structure look like in terms of the practices and the principles when responding to challenges or pursuing regionalism more generally. Oh, sorry, I've got one other slide here just to note that ASEAN's chairmanship changes year on year, and I'm going to return to this in a moment. And the chair is able to sort of set the agenda, host the summits, engage in the ad hoc conflict management when it arises, and represent ASEAN to international audiences. So Malaysia has just sort of passed it off to the Philippines. And this also means that we expect to see the chair sort of playing leading roles in events like we saw recently in terms of the mediation and ultimate ceasefire agreement between Cambodia and Thailand under the Malaysian chairmanship, which looks an awful lot like the mediation of the same dispute under the Indonesian chairmanship back in 2011 as well. And we can sort of bring these into comparison in a little bit as well. Okay, but in terms of the principles and practices across the organization, across these sort of dynamics, these institutional features that I've noted, whether it's the CPR meeting in Jakarta pictured here, or the foreign ministers or leaders meeting at the annual summits, I think we likely know already, like any sort of community or group or social context, there's likely to be sort of formal and informal rules or a way that the game is played. And ASEAN, of course, is famous for having an ASEAN way or the ASEAN ways, some sort of amorphous set of norms or principles that scholars of different stripes attest to being consequential to how ASEAN goes about its business of regional governance and regionalism more generally. And I'm not going to sort of dwell on this, but I think that this is a useful sort of starting point to consider, that there is sort of dynamics that we can see over time that are consequential to how ASEAN leaders, those pictured here, and political elite working within the organization, understand and confront moments of crises or challenges within the region. They're shaped by dynamics of state power. I think some states and some sort of agents within states matter more in a sense. They're shaped by existing institutional dynamics and the opportunities and limitations that come from the kind of slight institutional design right here. And they're shaped by what's happened over time, by established practices, path dependence, et cetera. And it's worth sort of underscoring a number of these, I think, as we think about how ASEAN is engaged with questions of human rights and conflict management issues in the region recently and today. So a few things I'll highlight that I think for those who sort of read and scholarship on ASEAN, and I'm curious for those sort of engaging ASEAN from the NGO, civil society side, for example, if this resonates or not with your thoughts. But what I would suggest, sort of being quick, we can see a few sort of important core elements of the way that governance is pursued in ASEAN that's attested by, again, by scholars of various stripes and practitioners across states and the organization themselves. This draws on a quick plug for a book I published in 2022, comparing the regionalism and conflict management practices of Southeast Asia with South America, examining how and why relatively similar disputes or challenges are understood, confronted, and managed in very different ways across different elite diplomatic communities. And in the ASEAN case, I think there's a few things to underscore. So I think sort of foundationally, ASEAN is a status quo organization that is largely there for states, for state governments to serve their interests. So it's sort of explicitly a state-led regionalism that relies on consensus-based decision-making, that all 10, now 11 members need to agree with only modest coercion on the sidelines of summits, et cetera, to foster that coercion rather than some kind of formal voting mechanism, et cetera. This means states, their governments have to be comfortable with ASEAN behavior, practices, conflict management, et cetera, for ASEAN as an institution to play a role. And as I've already suggested, and this is related to this, ASEAN has a relatively informal institutional structure. Ad hoc dialogue, a reliance on summitry, and as already hinted, sort of the discussions in the background alongside those summits, et cetera, are sort of the crux of the way that regionalism is done here. And this relates to a further point, as my colleague and friend Deepak Nair at Australian National University has explored in a lot more detail, which is a practice of face saving in reference to external audiences. And there's a lot of caveats around this, but an idea that there is sort of an ASEAN community which can be couched from critique beyond the region is sort of an important practice that emerges and I think sort of recursively informs its informal institutional design, et cetera. And then relatedly, and what we really want to focus on, I think, in this discussion to some degree, is a continued and I think sort of explicit commitment to some version of non-interference in member states' domestic affairs. And there's a lot of caveats to that statement. But generally speaking, non-interference is understood as overt critique of other member states. Again, with some caveats, this varies across issue area. It definitely varies by member states. Some member states are more ripe for critique than others, for example, as we'll explore. But non-interference is sort of a particular norm as it's understood and expressed in Southeast Asia. What I'll add to this, though, is alongside these sort of principles and norms is a growing interest in ASEAN centrality. The notion that ASEAN ought to play a or the leading role in responding to various regional and even extra-regional challenges within the wider Indo-Pacific. ASEAN has its sort of outlook for the Indo-Pacific as an example of that. And this is tied to concerns around legitimacy and credibility, that ASEAN ought to play a leading role or a central role in responding to challenges, to demonstrate its efficacy, its legitimacy in the eyes of various audiences, domestically and international, and demonstrate its credibility as an institution. And I think broadly stated, we can see this as a kind of normative order. It's dynamic, that varies over time. There's sort of a push and pull involved, but these are kind of useful background to think about when we're examining both what ASEAN has done and the limits in terms of its governance actions and responses to challenges. I also think that over time, it's clear that this serves established interests, this sort of conglomeration of practices and principles here largely upholds patterns of a status quo over time. So in my view, when we start seeing sort of variation in how ASEAN responds to crises, a lot of that has to do with how inherent, and I think we can already see sort of explicit tensions within this normative order are resolved or contested. In particular, questions around how to uphold ASEAN centrality alongside some version of its non-interference principle when one bends for the other, for example. And that seems to vary over time, I think, and over both issue area and in response to particular member states, Myanmar being our sort of most sort of immediate case today. I'm going to sort of skip over this for the sake of over time quickly. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time. I'm sorry. But I just will note that a number of scholars, Dylan Lowe among them, have sort of recognized the tension in these elements of ASEAN's normative order, as I would refer to it, and seen that how ASEAN has mediated or resolved this tension has had some patterns over time. So as quoted here, he suggested, for example, that ASEAN member states have been quite prepared historically to cede ASEAN's centrality to preserve the norm of non-interference. But I think things are sort of changing, at least in reaction to dynamics in Myanmar since the mid-2000s and after 2021 to some degree. So I've got a quote here from an official I spoke to back in 2019. This animates a paper I published recently with some grad students who argue that things were different, that this is not the 90s when a state could just say no to ASEAN's interest and credibility and legitimacy, and that's how things were done, that something has changed. And I think we can see that a little bit in reference to the ASEAN response to Myanmar, to the coup since 2021. So I suggest that there's two key components that we can see in terms of in terms of ASEAN's response. Ooh, sorry. Here, I think, Gillian, I think I'm running low on time. I apologize.
Yeah, I was just going to encourage you to please start wrapping up, even though this is fascinating.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, I can come back to this later. But I would just suggest that the two dynamics that we can see, this studied ambiguity, being unsure of how to treat the military government in Myanmar, and the sort of famous or infamous 5-point consensus that ASEAN adopted in the months after the coup and has sort of been moribund since, demonstrate an adherence to ASEAN status quo, as certain member states, particularly Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, are sort of wrestling with how to resolve the non-interference principle they don't want to abandon, but a need because of legitimate interests, I think, to some degree, and concerns over credibility and legitimacy and ASEAN unity to demonstrate ASEAN's resolve or centrality. I can come back to this later. I apologize for being over time, but I would just suggest that I think it's important to recognize the diversity of ASEAN members and how that informs the institutional design, the practices and principles of the organization, and how those things have been reconciled in practice seems to drive the way that ASEAN is responding to conflicts or crises. And I think it means ASEAN has very limited response to the issues we're caring about today. So thank you, and apologies for going over.
Thank you for that super fascinating conversation or presentation. Let's continue the conversation. We're going to hand it over to you, Mr. Daniel Awigra.
Thank you so much, our fabulous moderator, Gillian, and thank you for give some layout or the foundation by Dr. Aarie, what is ASEAN having, and then the infrastructure challenges and some kind of issues that now make us can be united or even divided. So later on, I guess, let's explore further. But now I'm honored to be here and I'll sharing what I've been working for the last 13 years in the ASEAN advocacy. I'll share most likely taking samples of the addressing what everybody's know really into, which is the climate justice. But at the same time, of course, not just only in ASEAN, but all over the world, we have an issues of migration. So I'll take this example as an, how to call that, ways to see ASEAN from my point of view. I'm the executive director of Human Rights Working Group, but at the same time, also co-founder of BBC. It is not British Broadcasting Corporation, instead better engagement between East and Southeast Asia. So I think, oh my God, I cannot, sorry, wait a minute. I cannot move my slide. Wait a minute. Apologize. I'll just finding another. Okay. Sorry. Apologize. My technical. 1 second, Dr. Gillian.
Sure. We can work through the technical difficulties. So, oh, it looks like you're sharing. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Okay, yes.
There you go.
Now I think let's using the other. So I think this is the urgency how this climate justice need for ASEAN to be taken up. According to IPCC or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change by 2023, there has been this disproportionate impact effect by climate change to the state and also the community. So, like for instance, just very tiny rains, then the whole city got flooded, and a lot of issues, impacted to the vulnerable communities everywhere, not just only ASEAN but also wherever in the world. But in ASEAN, according to the study conducted by ASEAN by 2021, there has been 7 kinds of vulnerability that expose ASEAN becoming much more vulnerable to climate change. High extreme poverty level, and then dependency on agriculture and natural resources directly affecting by climate change. They rely on the farming, fishing, and so on and so forth. And then highly concentrated activated economy in the coastal area, and their heavy, huge migration trend across within and across the region. So there has been a survey conducted by the ICS, asking for around 4,000 population across ASEAN member state by 2024, around 3,000 respondents, asking their experience. So it's been clear share that these issues becoming an issues by the population, basically, of the climate change. But the most important thing, according to the people of ASEAN, from the respondent, say that who should pay the greatest cost of climate measure? Some of them saying the majority is the national government, and then the second of all, the business and industries, while the remaining, I think the third big respondents say that the sub-national government. That's very interesting. I'll try to move on as an example by taking an example of the impact of climate change, because if we see the climate justice or climate crisis currently, it is the accumulation of what so-called the long histories of extractive industries in the region, especially in my country, where in the local level, village level, the resident, the citizen, lost their clean water sources and productive land. Deforestation, landslides, sedimentation, it get the collapsing, the violet, the entire period that they ask, they forced to migrate. And most likely the most vulnerable one are the women who lost their livelihood and seek to rescue work. There has been a lot of study about it, that because of the paralyzing their village, they forced to be domestic worker, even sex worker in many other region and also other countries as a migrant worker. So it is exploitations of nature, while I think there is a gender element aspect in it. So I think when we talk about climate impact, so it has to be also come up with the ecological crisis with the gender sensitive point of view. I think the other example was the migrant fishers in the region. They immediately got the direct impact by climate change. So it is also a sector where I see so much paradox. Those who were working in the distant water, in the high seas or international water, paid less than those who work in the territorial water. They also not getting social protection, not having minimum wages. So I think this also so much exposing so much precarious situation, undecent work, 4D sector, dirty, difficult, dangerous, and deadly. And a lot of Indonesian fishers and also Southeast Asian fishers migrate among countries, but also migrating among region in East Asia, mainly under the Taiwanese flag fishing vessel, Korean, Japan, and so on and so forth, working in the Pacific Ocean. So by 2023, we've been working for advocating the policies on the ASEAN guideline on migrant fisher and also the declaration. I'll continue with the key challenges after I explain two cases on the agriculture impact and also the fisheries impact. The key challenges that we've been seeing as a citizen is that the presence of the extractive industries, including the fisheries sector, they are really doing what's so-called the extractive capital securitization. As a human rights activist, as supporting the victim, when we try to challenge, when we try to address these issues, what we face in the field, we face the security actor, the police, and also the military office troops, in the field. Not just only for those two sectors, but mining a lot, nickel and then coal, and also garment, and also plantation. So that's what we see. So these kinds of right-wing group, authoritarian government work together with the military government, trying to silence the voices, the protests. So they really, label us. They really try to figure us just like an object of their development. So when we try to somehow challenge the plan of the transformation of the electric vehicle, for instance, they maybe label us as anti-green, anti-energy transformation. It was somehow there are huge issues in it. So then we always face these kinds of challenges. But after this, I'd like to share a bit how to advocating further these issues in the region, knowing the challenges as already mentioned by Aarie previously. So in ASEAN, while we try to really push through the issue, we have somehow to follow the agenda of the meeting that's mentioned already, 1,000. I just come back from Malaysia for, I think, 4 times this year, attending some, of course, only human rights meeting with the AICHRs of Malaysia, under the leadership of AICHR Malaysia. And this year, they come up with 2 declarations that later on I will share a bit with both the environment and also the right to development. So taking the examples of the advocacy of ASEAN Declaration of Migrant Fisher and the guideline, we really know, where the official gathering, meeting, have a session, then civil society try to come up with our position. I'll just mention a brief what we've been doing. We doing some collective knowledge building among CSO and victim and the community, affected community. And then we come up with the regional policy advocacy. Yes, it is already severe sector. Yes, it is so much lacking in terms of protection and also well-being. But how are we going to transform from the difficult life experience becoming a policy paper, for instance? So we also do some multi-stakeholder engagement, working with the government, the business actor, fellow civil society, academia, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, we also provide avenue to really capacitate ourselves and doing public campaign. The policy paper that I share here is basically the extraction where we facilitated from the life experience of fisher, and then it is submitted to the ASEAN dedicated body on the fisheries, and it was majority of them being taken up as the guideline. So it was produced by the October 2023, a year before the guideline is adopted. So this is how we work. I mean, later on, I can explain further. Maybe there is time available. In Malaysia, I've also participated in some event and also meetings, directly, indirectly contribute to this newly Human Rights and Environment Declaration. Declaration means the political commitment among leaders that I think is in line from what the UN already also agreed under the resolution that by 2022, I guess, that the right to a clean and healthy, safe, and sustainable environment is also part of human right. And also in ASEAN also come up with the new declaration of the right to development. It is somehow so much interesting because it is mentioned by ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, but during the Malaysian chairship, so the ASEAN Declaration was 2012, there has been heavily discussed what is this about the right to development. Maybe later on we can go through the each of the declaration. I think it is clear that now I think advancing climate justice, especially in the context ASEAN, is necessary because, as mentioned before, this appropriate impact faced by the community and vulnerable group. I think the more climate change we have, the impact we have, the limited enjoyment of human rights, including the right to life, right to health, adequate standard living, the rights of women, children, indigenous, and so on and so forth being, limited and also reduced and also somehow taken out or vanished, So I guess it is new challenges for ASEAN to deal with such current challenges. But anyway, there has been also a lot of initiative taken by some scholar or research institute, like for instance, the Danish Institute for Human Rights come up with the indicator tools of work that can measure the impact of climate change and the violation or the abuse of human rights faced by the community. So I guess this is, the upcoming, research is needed, the upcoming, community-led assessment about the impact of the environment and also their human right is needed. I guess this is also important to be taken up. Some opportunities that we can see in the cross-regional solidarity or regional context, there has been a lot of also initiative to making sure that the global supply chain are free from forced labor, modern slavery, child labor, and so on and so forth. Some country already trying to making it into the legally binding CSDDD in the Europe, for instance, recently, and now we know we also participated the ASEAN EU policy dialogue on human rights, and that's, I guess, an important occasion where civil society also can assess the impact of environment and human right impact, and then let's also deal with this current development of the economic, social, and governance, environment and social government, human right, economic due diligence, using ASEAN as a modality to address the issues, while this is also already been recognized in the politically commitment, their rights, their livelihood. So it can be also a tools for engagement to address these issues with the cross-regional actor such as the EU, ASEAN plus 3, China, Korea, Japan, and so on and so forth. And I think there's also people are more connected. Digital can be also becoming a potential to be explored further. And last but not least, I think now is being flexible, doing private and public partnership, and somehow we can come up with many other ideas and project and advocacy together. This is my last slide. How we move forward, I think we need to somehow doing a systematic assessment on the climate change and then the impact of human rights in the region. The more data on it, I think is the better, because this really a region that's so much vulnerable, like maybe in the Pacific Ocean, the sea level are rising all the time. we need to also shifting our paradigm. I do really know that ASEAN is happy to talk about peace, but I think peace without justice, there will be no sustainable peace without justice. That's so much difficult. So can also ASEAN now thinking not just only like economic development as their core, but why don't we really dramatically or revolutionary change from saving the planet first and then the people and then the profit? That's also a paradigm shift that somehow so much challenging, where every member state are competing to their economic development and growth. I think the Malaysian chairship, inclusivity and sustainability, it's huge stage for global leader to come to ASEAN, and it's also very appreciated that Malaysia can also perform, that ASEAN is a relevant actor. But in the right of development, I think human right and right development share three key things for me. First, whether the development project are accountable to the human rights, whether they can be access to everyone in the remote, in the urban, in the similar quality, and then answerability, whether the project also can answer the affected community, the victim or no, or just only sustaining the status quo or the elite. And then I think there has been issues. We also work on it, social protection, because otherwise, people will get differently impact. Those who are the have can, enjoy the health, insurance or private insurance, while the poor somehow cannot access anything. They can be also unnecessary debt. A mandatory human right due diligence and community-led assessment, grievance mechanism to get the effective remedy. That is something that ASEAN has to do. Can be in the regionalism, but also can be within ASEAN member state can also come up with, because otherwise this opportunity cannot be linked up. But I know it is so much challenging issues. Human right due diligence, they rely on the third-party audit, and then can work only in the within national, where somehow the violation happen cross-regionally, in like for interfishers, happen in the international ocean, multi-jurisdiction happening. I think that's also some challenges that we need to take a look. And then working among AICHR and senior official minister of environment, trying to push forward the declaration into the action. It's so much important, because ASEAN, when they respond the issues and crisis, they always come up with the declaration and also a document. We've been waiting, and we've been seeing a lot that somehow it's only rhetoric, but we, the people, really try to taking as an opportunity to mingle each other, to networking each other, trying to solve, share, and come up with the things that maybe can be workable by ourselves. I thank you so much. I'm sorry for the issues of technology. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pak Daniel, Awigra, for that heartfelt and also really impassioned and enlightening presentation. And we'll move on to the last presentation now. Dr. Sirada, please go ahead.
Good morning from Thailand, and also good afternoon and good evening to those in the US. Today, I will talk about human rights and human rights issues in ASEAN, and also some limitations from the human rights mechanism. So let me, prepare myself first. Okay. Here, so my name is Sirada. I'm from Chiang Mai University, Faculty of Political Science and Public Administration. And thank you so much for the organizers for this important discussion. It's really privileged to be here, part of your conversation. So I'll start like this. You can see in the screen on the photo of ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. And you can see one point in the declaration saying that they interpret human rights standard, which kind of like different from what we know at the UN standard, right? They have the clause to showing the relativism, for example, like this in the Article 7, saying that at the same time, the realization of human rights must be considered in the regional and national context, things like this. So yeah, over the past 15 years, ASEAN has developed a more visible human rights architecture. On paper, we have this, like AHRD, and also we have AICHR, ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, So both of them kind of like significant milestones, right? And also we have also ACWG, we have mechanism on migrant workers as well. And also we have a lot of collaboration with civil society organizations in the region. This one's like from these milestones, we can see like this one raise hopes for us that okay, our ASEAN will move forward towards stronger human rights protection. But yes, you all know about like this. There's a lot of paradox on this, right? Because ASEAN was never designed to manage internal crisis or mass atrocity within its member states, right? It was created to maintain peace among the states, not to confront violation inside them. So also, Dr. Aarie talked about non-interference and consensus. That would also one of the foundation principles that being the obstacle to dealing with internal conflict or an internal crisis, especially like several human rights crises in the region. Right today, our region faces a series of deeply human rights crises: widespread conflict, displacement, shrinking civic space, and cross-border persecution. So this situation exposed how ASEAN traditional principle of non-interference and consensus, which help prevent interstate conflict, also limit the region's capacity to respond to human rights violation committed by its own members. So in the photo, I choose the photos from Myanmar. As you know, like as in the introduction, I'm working on Myanmar issue. That's why I want to point out and highlight the issue in Myanmar. So photo of the atrocity happened inside Myanmar, and the bottom photo showing the school was destroyed and some children will die during the airstrike by the junta. So here, like, because like Myanmar is the clearest and most urgent case. The situation in Myanmar, you all know about the military coup in 2021, right? And since then, Myanmar has descended into civil war. But of course, the country was never been in peace, right? Since independence until 2021, there are always like armed conflict and then political repression. But I mean, like since 2021 coup, there's more and more violence throughout the country and throughout and nationwide, and to every kind of like every group of people, not only the ethnic groups, but also even Burman people, the majority people, they also got affected by the junta as well. And also the military, as you know, like have carried out this airstrike on civilian areas. They burned some villages, and also they just started forced conscription since early last year. And this also affects like all young people inside the country, no matter they are politically active or not, but everyone got affected. And they also have been like arbitrary detention and many forms of political repressions. So the humanitarian impact is staggering, right? Over 3 million people have been displaced internally, and they also face like high humanitarian needs, while there's so many humanitarian blocks and aids due to the political issues inside the country and the armed conflict. Also, the junta itself, like they because of the conflict with the resistant groups, they are the one who also block all the humanitarian needs. And also like that displacement out of the country, like many have fled across borders, especially into Thailand. So Thailand become like the main stakeholder and got the impact from the crisis in Myanmar. And sadly, like many people who fled to Thailand, they have to live in legal limbo. They have to face the problem of legal status. And these displaced persons, because they are not recognized as refugees according to Thai law, so many of them have to seek protection through several methods. Possible like being migrant workers on the paper, or maybe some of them have to be undocumented and face the like corruption, bribery, and abuse by even Thai authorities. So they have to live in gray zone, and they are unable to access to certain protection on human rights assistance, and they're even at risk of arrest or deportation. So like the top up, like the crisis top up a lot. Even they fled from the country. ASEAN collective response to this catastrophe, like Aarie say, like they began with the 5-point consensus since the year of the coup, right, in 2021. At that time, Brunei was the chairmanship. So this 5-point consensus called for an end to violence, dialogue among parties, and humanitarian assistance. So on paper, on document, it looked promising, right? But now we have seen that already 4 years, almost 5 years, right? Almost 5 years, and then even the junta announced the election, which is directly controlled by them, and there's been little progress on that, and violence continues, and the consensus has no enforcement mechanism. Also, like, we have humanitarian body like AHRD Center. It's been engaged, but its assistance is limited, right? They mostly focus a lot on disaster relief approach and focus on logistic and aid delivery, but avoids political realities of the conflict. So they will help Myanmar crisis with, of course, the natural disaster. But when it comes to the political conflict, it's being kind of like trying to be like neutral, rather than touch upon the root cause of the violence, of the state violence. Also, so this means ASEAN has sidestepped the very cause of the suffering. So meanwhile, member states such as Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, for example, have taken different positions. You can see like Malaysia and Indonesia are more vocal than Thailand. And this is also kind of like reflecting the absence of unifying ASEAN stand, and then even like the stance would be according to the chairmanship each year. It's not kind of like a continuous and consistent. Also very state-centric, right? Prioritizing relations among governments over the protection of people. So this failure in Myanmar is not accidental. It stems from ASEAN institutional design and its founding norms. So beyond Myanmar, not only that I would like to talk only about Myanmar, but if we see in general a broader human rights repression in the region, right? So of course, Myanmar tragedy is the most visible, but not an exception. Across mainland Southeast Asia, like including Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, we are witnessing a steady erosion of civic and political freedoms. Like freedom of expression, right? We have a very serious problem on that. It's increasingly restricted. Activists and journalists face intimidation, imprisoned, and in some cases enforced disappearances. In recent years, a worrying phenomenon has emerged, right? Not only inside the country, but when they flee to neighboring countries, they also face the phenomenon called transnational repression. So this is how governments cooperate to silence political dissidents who have fled abroad, mostly fled to neighboring countries. So we have seen activists from mainland Southeast Asian countries targeted, abducted, or pressured even in their neighboring countries. It's all country here, even including Thailand as well. Even Thai activists also got problem on this. And this represents a new form of authoritarian cooperation, acquired transnational solidarity among regimes to preserve control and suppress dissent. It shows that while ASEAN's formal institutions are limited by non-interference, its member states can be remarkably effective at cooperating when it comes to controlling their citizens. So it's kind of like they say they will not interfere, but actually they allow some certain of interfere, but in a different direction. Also, digital space has become the new frontier of this repression as well. So of course, digital would promote the, how to say, the freedom of people to access to news, to information, but at the same time, digital platform become the space, become the area that the state controls the citizens. The government across the region use the cyber laws, civilians, and censorship to monitor activities and restrict online expression, often under the pretext of protecting national security or preventing so-called fake news. So the result is a regional landscape where civic space is shrinking, not expanding, and where ASEAN's collective silence risks normalizing repression as the regional norm. So you can see, like, we have, of course, certain ASEAN mechanism, human rights mechanism, as I mentioned, AICHR, AHRD, ACWG, and so on and so forth. ASEAN human rights body deserve recognition of expanding the conversation on the right beyond traditional political freedom. So you can see, like, AICHR and related framework have created important space for dialogue, training, and awareness raising. AICHR has recently promoted several new thematic agendas, such as the very recent ASEAN Declaration on the right to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Also, Mr. Daniel talked about right to development, right? And also the other one is that the ASEAN Declaration on the right to development and the right to peace. They also have discussed some emerging items, some emerging agenda, including business and human right and AI, and the right to mental health in the digital age. So this is, we can see that there are a lot of efforts to reflect the evolving understanding of the right in the context of economic growth, technology, and social well-being. But these mechanisms still face structural constraints. They are intergovernmental, have primarily promotional rather than protective mandates, and lack independence, investigative, or enforcement powers. And you can see that even the emerging agenda, they have to gear the focus to less political agenda. As a result, when crises like Myanmar occur, the region's human rights institutions are limited in how far they can respond. The challenge, therefore, is not the existence of ASEAN human rights institutions, but is about their mandate and political environment. Without stronger political will from member states, this mechanism risks being confined to thematic discussion. Valuable, this very good and valuable, but it disconnects from the region's most pressing protection crisis and the gravest human rights violation. So we can see that the humanitarian also fallout from the political crisis is immense a lot. For example, in Myanmar, of course. So we have to, how to say, rely a lot on the roles of the local civil society organization, ethnic actors in Myanmar, and even community-based groups, right? They operate at personal risks and also at the same time, ASEAN insistence on channeling assistance through state mechanism has made it difficult to partner with these local actors. So they cannot tackle the very foundation of humanitarian crisis in Myanmar. Yeah, we have the approach on the ASEAN centrality and incredibility, right? So the failure to address Myanmar crisis effectively also raised question about ASEAN centrality, a concept central to its diplomatic identity. ASEAN has long portrayed itself as the key convening power in regional security, yet its inability to resolve or even contain about the gravest conflict within its own membership undermines this credibility. So we can see external actors outside ASEAN, like the UN, major powers, US, China, and international NGOs step in to fill the gap, right? So ASEAN at the same time risks losing not only the moral authority, but also political relevance to its own issue. So this is not merely a human rights failure. This is also a strategic problem, right, that challenge ASEAN standing in the wider regional order. This is my conclusion. So we need to look towards a more human-centered regionalism So to conclude, the crisis we see across Southeast Asia, from the conflict and displacement to the erosion of basic freedoms in many countries. So this underscore one clear truth that ASEAN human rights and humanitarian framework remain constrained by the very norm that define the association. So the principles of non-interference, consensus, and sovereignty have helped maintain interstate stability, but they have also limited ASEAN ability to protect individuals from state-driven harms. Real progress often comes not from official ASEAN institutions, but from civil society networks like Daniel, and also local humanitarian actors and transnational advocacy coalitions that work across borders to protect people where state cannot act. So if ASEAN wishes to remain relevant to addressing 21st century challenges, it must gradually evolve from state-centric model of cooperation to truly human-centered regionalism, to center human dignity, protection, and accountability at the heart of this ASEAN community. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks so much to all of you for these really fascinating presentations. I want to encourage people who are out in the webinar Zoom room to please go ahead and fill in some questions that you might want to ask the panelists into the chat. But just before we dive into question and answer, I wanted to give the speakers an opportunity to respond to what you've heard the others say. And it's been really interesting to think across the different presentations and the ideas that that you all were sharing, you know, this idea about trying to balance centrality with non-interference, as Dr. Aarie was bringing into the conversation, and thinking about how actually with the diversity makes for a sort of dynamic mode of non-interference. While Dr. Sirada was talking about actually how some of these non-interference policies get in the way of being able to move, I guess, the needle on any of these human rights issues and the paradoxes of non-interference. It was really interesting to hear you talk about the case of a lot of the places that you were focused on in mainland Southeast Asia. Also makes me think of cases in Indonesia or in the area of West Papua, where you have similar issues about, you know, really sort of blocking people's access to civil space, and these similar issues with displacement and incredible violence. And so that also makes me think about some connections between Dr. Sirada's and Pak Daniel's presentation about how these processes of displacement, they come partially through militaristic violence, but they also come in relation to extractive processes. And this is certainly the case in Myanmar too, that a lot of these politics are related to politics of extraction in some areas. So anyway, so much to think about with all of your presentations. But I guess maybe you can either, if you have burning thoughts that you want to ask or questions that you want to ask each other, please go ahead. And otherwise, maybe we can think a little bit about this relationship between trying to balance what seems like a need for economic development, for sovereignty, but then on the other hand, the idea that comes with extractive and sometimes violent or often violent processes in the places that you're all focusing on. So I don't know if anybody here wants to start off conversation or comments.
May I start a bit asking both a very excellent presentation from Aarie or Dr. Sirada. So I think in ASEAN, we face the real challenge while the US government now is really trying somehow shifting the global arrangement. In ASEAN, we still like a kind of trying to developing the regionalism using the rule-based, arrangement. even though, of course, with very much a lot of limitation, non-interference, and then a consensus decision-making process. But U.S. introduced the deal-based, arrangement. So how is it going under the Malaysia? How you see in the future arrangement whether the multilateralism and also regionalism there has a future or no? Well, among member of ASEAN also we know somehow closer to China, and then also make some relationship. How this kind of dynamic that ASEAN centrality is trying to how to navigate this stream basically. So that's my concern to Dr. Aarie, and then to Sirada. I think Myanmar has been the test for ASEAN centrality for last 5 years, especially after the coup, and then the election on December next month will be also have a disputed opinion in terms of member and also the international communities as in the UN that they not really like endorsing, even they don't want this happening, asking to like it is election by the junta. So how you see this election can also how do you call that renew the commitment or even worsening how ASEAN deal with the Myanmar? I just put two things to two of you. Thank you so much.
I'll respond really, really briefly because I've got a whole set of questions for you both too. I've sort of prediction for the future. I'm not sure, but I would just sort of agree that I think ASEAN is tethered to a particular view of a rules-based regional and order, and to variable degrees wants to be the author of some of those rules. The outlook in the Indo-Pacific speaks to this, trying to play a central role in shaping what those rules are. I think this comes back to my earlier point that I think like fundamentally recognizing the diversity of member states, their national interests, their push-pull, their own agency within the US, China, and a host of other actors is really important too. But I don't see necessarily a cohesive and singular ASEAN voice in how to navigate all the uncertainties that are coming from the US right now, nor sort of a singular and coherent approach in the face of sort of broader challenges to the global order. I think this kind of comes back to some questions I sort of had. This came up in both presentations, but Dr. Sirada's presentation too. ASEAN is fit for certain purposes, and some of those may be regressive, etc. And it's a challenge for the organization to respond to a host of other challenges. And I think responding to the uncertainties, to say the least, that come from the US now, I think ASEAN as a forum to bring 11 member states now together, I think will be pushed to a test. I'm not super optimistic that there'll be a singular voice in how to navigate that space, or it'll be sort of left to bilateral arrangements that would do ASEAN no favor on unity. Would be my quick response.
Yes, I would respond. Thank you so much for raising the point on election. But I have to be clear that the election that will be organized in December is just the first phase and not throughout the country. So it's not normal election generation that we all did, right? In other countries did, right? So you can see they announced the first phase in December and second phase in January, and also they announced even has some certain townships inside Myanmar that will not have election, and they have so many methods to control the election. So meaning that you can see how it is so reluctant for the ASEAN, especially under Malaysian chairmanship, to respond to this, to take the stance on the junta control election in Myanmar. So you can see that they just announced that they will not send the observers in the name of ASEAN, but at the same time opening channel for ASEAN member states to be able to send the observer bilaterally, but not on the name of ASEAN. So this is at least what Malaysia chairmanship can do, but you can see some reluctance as well because of the ASEAN norm and then safe-facing culture, right? That they also open channel for bilaterally doing that. So I can see that ASEAN under Malaysia chairmanship, they try a lot to follow certain norms and principles, not sending observer, and at the same time to point out that actually Myanmar needs political dialogue and inclusive dialogue before the election, which is true for me. Because this election is not free and fair at all, and also the country is still deeply a lot of conflict and civil war throughout the country, and then no space on the political agenda, dialogue and negotiation yet among different resistance. So I think ASEAN should do more this to open space. I can see that Malaysia open, of course, space for some resistance, but it's a very back channel diplomacy. It's still not official. It's not part of the ASEAN culture, but we need more. We need more from ASEAN to have the neutral space, to be the mediator as well for Myanmar. Of course, this should be Myanmar-led process, but because of the fragmented and then a lot of deeply conflict inside, yeah, I think it's an opportunity for ASEAN that can do more.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, I was
or a
just
set of
going to say,
questions?
Aarie, please
I'll try
go
to be
ahead.
brief because I know our time is limited, but I wrote a whole bunch of questions for you both that maybe I'll put in an email. But I think, Danielle, I'll just start by saying thank you so much for the great presentation and for your work as well, which I think is so important and effectual. But I was really curious in some of your discussion, I think this gets to the point we were just sort of discussing, because this came to me again in Dr. Sirada's presentation, like ASEAN has changed, at least, there's institutional innovations, there's more of a regime around human rights, et cetera, even if we'd be pessimistic and critical, et cetera. But there are developments. And I'm curious, in your experience, sort of where you find as a kind of important, impactful civil society actor, allies or avenues that you can affect sort of ASEAN as an institution's approach to the issue here, or more generally. Like you mentioned, we know what's going on at the summits and we know who to talk to. You also mentioned, the Danes, the EU, the ASEAN +3 network. It seems like there's an array of different actors that you sort of have to navigate and position yourself within. So I'd be curious if you could just comment on sort of where you see avenues to affect what I think we all sort of described as a very status quo oriented, state-led, et cetera, organization. So I'd be curious sort of how that's navigated and where you see the potential for success. And then sort of a similar question for Sirada. I was just curious, you painted sort of very pessimistic prospects given the institutional and the normative terrain of the organization, but you still again sort of underscored there have been developments, on paper and in a real sense, including like the AHA Center has been involved in Myanmar. It's sort of seen as this sort of strange and apolitical tool that can do things that ASEAN otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So given that sort of tension between, you're pessimistic for grounds I'm very sympathetic to, but then you've also sort of highlighted the prospects and real, if sort of minimal change, like where do you think there, again, are avenues for ASEAN to do more, either in Myanmar or more generally on this topic? I'd just be curious for both of your thoughts. Thank you. And thank you both again for the wonderful presentations. I learned a lot.
May I directly to just saving the time? So thank you so much for the very challenging question that I think a lot of people expected. I think the expectation is not to be managed while advocating human rights in ASEAN, because I think the key is our endurance. I think now ASEAN is on the very preliminary stage where they're setting up norm, and then while the norm is really into us, into the people, into the victim, this somehow can be also a successful. But it doesn't mean that norm, it can be immediately translate into the reality. There has to be like law enforcement. There has to be some program. There has to be some, intervention needed that I think under my generation, we cannot really see. But I also witnessing by my own, life, where I've been, working for these human rights issues in ASEAN, that previously, like 10 years ago, we cannot say anything about human rights in the region. We cannot say anything about human, like for the death penalty in Vietnam. Can you imagine? It's all sensitive, no data. But through ASEAN, there has been a channel, so mitigating. So, and then I think there has been also a lot of development. So the whole citizen of the world, not just only government, ASEAN only government or cooperation, but somehow the government also endorse and recognize our right. Then we can use this for many other occasions, like for instance, to really claiming our right in the court, while maybe there are some like a development on the BHR, HRDD, CSDDD in the Europe, or Modern Slavery Act in Australia, in the UK, forced labor. So that's also provide us a lot of excitement, while the business also now trying to more open to the respecting the human right under the BHR. So I think these states have to be managed. Otherwise, we'll be so much frustrated because we only think that government will implement. No way, and we know the direction is even worsen. So that's, I guess, my humble response to your very very important. Thank you, Dr. Aarie.
Thank you, Dr. Aarie. I think you summarized quite well that I'm quite pessimistic, but at the same time, I see some developments. And as Mr. Daniel said, and his role as well is exemplifying how CSO also have channels to engage with ASEAN mechanisms. So we have seen a lot of active participation from the CSO in Indonesia, in Philippines. I would say Indonesia and Philippines first, and then next would be Thailand and some other countries, but mainly I would say 3 countries. So at least I think like this is a very good to see that ASEAN open some space, even it's not fully, I would say not fully, but at least we can say human right language, right, to them using their own mechanisms. Even it's not comments, it's not enforcing, right, but we can use the language. And for the recent agendas, the recent mechanism and how to say emerging topics that they like AICHR and then ASEAN recently adopted, I think this is also a good way for them to be diplomatic. At the same time, they try to hear to some challenging new challenges. And at the end, it would also like benefit to people, right? For example, like the right to safe, clean, and sustainable environment. It seems to be quite less political, but at the same time, actually the cost of the environmental impact, like the mining, the extraction, is very political. It's very political. Like in Myanmar, I saw a question as well from the audience talking about the transboundary water pollution from Chiang state to Thailand, for example. Yeah, this is actually the root cause is really political, but the way that ASEAN and ASEAN mechanism to tackle this problem cannot be that political. So I think this is a good entry point for them to point out the right to development or the right to environment to at least address this in ASEAN setting. So this is would be my short answer.
Thanks so much for all of the ways that you weighed in on these opinions. I'm going to go to the chat because we only have a little bit of time remaining. So we have a question from Pin, and maybe I'll just, for the sake of time, I'll give you all the questions and you can answer them as you see fit. So from Pin, despite the non-interference principles, we see ASEAN attempts to play a role in interfering in interstate conflicts, kind of as Dr. Sirada brought up a little bit earlier. And so interstate conflicts through different mechanisms and through the efforts of individual member states. So can you share your insights on ASEAN mechanisms in engaging with internal conflicts, such as West Papua, for example, Southern Thailand, et cetera, and then more to the point of how these mechanisms can be enhanced by civil society organizations. The really big question then that comes with that is, what recommendations do you have for improving the mechanisms for conflict management in ASEAN? That's a really, really big one. So I think that might take up a lot of time, but I'll also just add the question from BP, which is ASEAN's concept of non-interference in Myanmar has already been compromised. So is this a sign of what's to come in the future? So I'll open that up. I don't know if there's anybody here who wants to start. with any of those questions.
Let me start with this question about how to address the such as how to call that issues, yeah. So high high tension political issues in the region, West Papua, Patani in southern Thailand, and maybe some others, of course, in Mindanao and so on and so forth. I think this also somehow already the ASEAN 5C, yeah, 5 Consensus 2020. I guess, back then, October. It's also the breakup momentum. Well, ASEAN has no rule of procedure, how to deal with the situation like that. So then they come up with, like a invention to at least, they're addressing something happening in Myanmar. And there is no rule of procedure to really, stop their membership on ASEAN. So while member state doing atrocities, doing gross human rights violation, or even genocide, or even war crime. So what should the mechanism in place that ASEAN can address? So I think ASEAN also in the limbo position, how to deal with the member state. Well, there is no such a normative clause or article. Oh, if the member state breaching human rights violation, human rights norm, so then this is the procedure. Whether they set up ad hoc commission, whether they set up with the how do you call that, the independent court, and so on and so forth. ASEAN has no such a thing to address this issue. So that's why I think this issue is becoming really the test of ASEAN, and also becoming the burden, the how do you call that, the chair to really how to navigate this, because the rotation of the chairship of ASEAN is changing from year to another. So I guess the solution is also somehow relay how advanced the chair of ASEAN want to bring up. If we can take up some modalities, we can take up, like for instance, using human rights declaration, using migrant rights declaration, or consensus, we can take up. But at the same time, how to really, how do you call that, push things through, to the things. While even among member states also, some of them also don't want to get intervened, because they don't want also get intervened by others. So I think this is always the issues where I think this ASEAN can also play with other international community. What ASEAN can do, for instance, I think humanitarian, because the neighboring, the most responsible to the crisis. So ASEAN can really play a humanitarian action, convincing, like for instance, in many other conflicts, I'm not only mentioning Myanmar, but they have to open the border, sending the immediate assistance, humanitarian assistance. That's maybe the immediate thing that ASEAN can do. For the political, there are plenty of rooms, plenty of occasion in the UN, in the Security Council, and so on and so forth. But, expecting everything to ASEAN, that ASEAN also have a lot of limitation that we need to manage, where we can, play in this modality that we have. I think that's also my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Daniel. Can we quickly hear from Dr. Sirada?
Yes, thank you, Daniel, for pointing out the limbo, and then I can see that because ASEAN want to kind of like save their state members, should not come as a leave the association, so they want to be kind of like a bridge. Even the member state really conducting atrocity or the gross human rights violation, they think like, okay, somehow, you can see in the past a lot of constructive engagement. Yeah, they recognize the human rights violation, but at the same time, they want to play a role bridge between those member states and the international community, right? So at the same time, it put ASEAN in the limbo in terms of dilemma, how it become being utilized by those member states, right, to legitimize themselves as well. So this is, I think, I would not have kind of like a concrete recommendation right now, but I can see a lot of challenges and I understand the intention of ASEAN, but at the same time, I don't understand. So I think like what we can do also, like more like people mainly, maybe they would refer to the UN mechanism when it comes to human rights human rights issues, right? When they want to advocate for human rights violation, and then using more on UN mechanisms than ASEAN. So ASEAN have very they have some norms that we can refer, but when it comes to utilization, we cannot rely a lot on that. So this is what we can see. So, but of course, I'm looking forward to the more and more development and progress in the human rights norms and human rights mechanism in ASEAN as well. And for the question on the on the non-tolerance in Myanmar has already compromised. I cannot see the sign to further develop this, because even you can see the mass atrocity happen. ASEAN still cannot do much as you see. So it's very much on the non-tolerance, and as Daniel said, because each country has its own wound, right? They're also conducting something towards their citizens, so that's why they don't want others to intervene them as well. So this is how we can see from the region.
Dr. Sirada, forgive me. I just want to give Dr. Aarie one last word, and we're coming close to a close. So maybe a couple of quick words in closing, Dr. Aarie, before we move to the finish of the webinar.
I wasn't quick with my presentation, so I'll be really quick here, because I think I would just echo my esteemed panelists here. I mean, I think following from Daniel's point, I mean, I would question whether ASEAN's the right forum for some of the things that people are expecting ASEAN to sort of to do. I mean, again, the crux of my presentation was both the institutional, the membership challenges, the existing principles, et cetera, sort of set ASEAN up for disappointment in some realms. I think, coming to Dr. Sirada's presentation, I still think, ASEAN has accomplished a lot, baseline piece, et cetera. It can manage a lot, but in some of these issues, within states in particular, confidence may be misplaced, right now that, maybe changes are coming. I would say, I think this kind of brought my questions around the AHA Center's role. I mean, that seems to be the one sort of piecemeal, potentially sort of a political tool ASEAN has at its disposal that can be sort of inserted into a variety of different conflicts or crises, despite being centered around disaster management. It's been tasked to do so much more across different contexts. So I think thinking about that institutional mechanism and how something similar could be developed or expanded upon might be my only way of sort of thinking about what more could be done in terms of responding to these kinds of crises. But I'll leave it there.
Wow. Well, thanks so much for those sort of rapid fire comments towards the end. And I'm sure this is a conversation we could have much longer, a much longer conversation about. But I just want to thank you all for a really fascinating conversation. I appreciate the way that the problems that ASEAN is facing now got situated in sort of a broader historical context. That was really helpful for thinking about the problems that are being faced in the current moment. And it will be interesting to see how we move in this sort of spectrum between pessimism and the possibilities as we move into the next year, with the chairship being in the Philippines. But thank you so much for sharing your time and sharing this space with us, and all of your wisdom. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Teri to help us close out the event. Thank you all. Mahalo.
Thank you so much, Gillian, for moderating an incredible discussion. Dr. Aarie, Dr. Daniel, and Dr. Sirada, we really appreciate your time and your expertise and knowledge. This was an amazing discussion about ASEAN membership, conflict, humanitarian issues, and also human rights. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We really appreciate it. Our next Loose Sea webinar is on Wednesday, December 3rd. It will be moderated by Dr. Mary Mustafa Nejad, and we're going to be focusing on the Loose Sea Field School that happened this past summer in Chiang Mai, Thailand, as well as in Makassar, Sulawesi, Indonesia. We hope you'll join us then. You'll be able to find the updated flyer for that next event on our website as soon as we get it posted. Again, thank you to everyone, all the attendees for coming and spending the afternoon or your early morning with us. And we will be posting this video as Ima, our tech expert, our wizard behind the scenes, has given you links for our website, our Facebook, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky. So please do follow us. We appreciate your support, and we hope you have a wonderful evening, afternoon, and the rest of your day tomorrow. Aloha.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, and nice
Bye. Thank you so
to meet you
much.
all. Thank
See
you
you
so
again.
much.